this episode, we're going to zoom in from the big picture flow map to the level where accountability becomes real, the level of the actual data elements and the decisions attached to them. A flow map shows movement, and an inventory shows holdings, but accountability requires a record that says, for this specific kind of data, here is why we have it, who can touch it, where it lives, and how long we keep it. Beginners sometimes assume accountability is achieved by writing a policy that says we take privacy seriously. Yet accountability is really the ability to answer detailed questions without guessing, especially when questions come from individuals, leaders, auditors, or regulators. If you cannot confidently explain why you hold a particular field or which systems contain it, or who has access, you are operating on hope. When you record data elements with purpose, access, systems, and retention, you turn privacy into a set of controlled facts, and that is what makes governance defensible. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at Cyber.Author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A data element, in privacy operations, is a unit of information about a person or linked to a person, and it can be as simple as an email address or as complex as a derived risk score. Recording data elements does not mean listing every microscopic column in every database from day one, but it does mean being intentional about what categories of information exist and how they are used. The reason to focus on data elements is that most privacy obligations attach to the nature of the information and the way it is processed, not to the name of the system. For example, contact details used for account support may be appropriate under one set of expectations, while the same details used for marketing may require different transparency and choices. Similarly, a log entry that includes an IP address can be personal data even if it lives in a security tool, and retention decisions may differ from those for business records. Recording data elements with context makes these distinctions visible. It also prevents teams from treating data as a blob that can be reused anywhere without thought. Purpose is the first required attribute to record because it is the guardrail that explains why the data exists and when it should not be used. Purpose should be stated in plain, operational language, such as account creation, service delivery, billing, fraud prevention, customer support, or legal record keeping, rather than broad phrases like improving our services. Purpose also needs to be connected to the collection context, because the same data element can legitimately serve different purposes depending on where it was collected and what the individual expected. Recording purpose helps prevent a common drift pattern where data collected for one reason quietly becomes used for another because it is convenient. It also supports transparency, because notices and user-facing disclosures are essentially public statements of purpose, and those statements must match reality. When purpose is recorded consistently, new proposals for internal sharing or analytics can be evaluated against the original intent rather than being approved by default. Purpose recording is how you make the concept of purpose limitation operational. Access is the next attribute, and it is where privacy governance meets real organizational behavior, because access is how most misuse and mistakes happen. Recording access means identifying which roles or functions can view, edit, export, or otherwise interact with the data element, and under what conditions. This is not just about a list of names. It is about understanding whether access is broad, whether it is role-based, and whether there are approvals or logging requirements for higher-risk access. Beginners often think of access as a security-only issue, but privacy programs care because access determines whether internal sharing is controlled and whether minimum necessary is actually practiced. Recording access also helps during incident response because you can quickly assess who could have touched the data and what logs might exist. It also supports audits because you can test whether access patterns match what the program claims and whether periodic reviews occur. When access is recorded, it becomes possible to enforce least privilege intentionally rather than hoping that permissions are reasonable. Systems are the third attribute, and recording systems means capturing where the data element resides, not only in the primary system of record, but also in downstream copies and derived datasets. A data element might be collected in an application database, copied into a customer relationship management platform, exported to an analytics warehouse, and summarized in reports, and each location changes risk and governance. Recording systems helps privacy operations because rights fulfillment depends on locating data reliably, and disposal depends on deleting or minimizing data across all relevant locations. It also helps in vendor governance because some systems are vendor systems, meaning your data element lives outside your direct environment under a processor relationship. Beginners sometimes assume that listing systems is enough, but accountability requires also capturing the nature of the storage, such as whether it is active operational storage, archival, logs, backups, or analytics. This nuance matters because controls differ and deletion feasibility differs. When systems are recorded with clarity, teams can act without rediscovering where data is hidden each time. Retention is the fourth attribute, and recording retention means stating how long the data element is kept, what triggers the clock, and what happens when the retention period ends. Retention should be justified, meaning it is tied to legal duties, risk, and business value, and it should also reflect the reality of where the data lives. For example, a retention rule might apply to the system of record, but downstream copies may need their own retention mechanism or might be governed by a shorter period. Retention recording also needs to capture exceptions like litigation holds or security investigations, because those exceptions often pause deletion. Beginners often treat retention as a number of years, but operational retention is usually event-based, like after account closure or after ticket resolution, and those events must be recorded reliably to execute deletion. Retention is also closely tied to transparency because organizations often promise to keep data only as long as necessary, and that promise must be backed by recorded rules. When retention is recorded at the data element level, disposal planning becomes far more precise and defensible. Accountability requires that these attributes be recorded in a way that is consistent enough to be searched, compared, and audited, which means you need standard language and standard categories across the program. If one team records purpose as customer success and another records it as account operations, you may be describing the same concept in different words, making it hard to manage and easy to misunderstand. Standardization does not mean forcing every team into unnatural wording, but it does mean choosing a controlled vocabulary for common purposes, data categories, and access roles. It also means having a consistent way to name systems and link them to owners. This standardization enables reporting because you can aggregate and analyze entries to see where sensitive data exists, where retention is longest, or where access is broad. It also supports change management because you can identify which records are impacted when a system changes or when a law introduces new obligations for a certain data category. Without standardization, your records become hard to use, and accountability becomes performative rather than practical. A risk-based approach helps you decide how deep to go because recording every data element across every system with perfect detail is not realistic for many organizations. Instead, you prioritize high-risk areas where accountability is most needed, such as systems that store sensitive data, systems with broad access, systems that share data externally, and processes that generate frequent rights requests or complaints. For those areas, you record data elements with greater specificity, including key identifiers and transformation points. For lower-risk areas, you may record at a slightly higher level, such as categories of data rather than each individual field, while still capturing purpose, access, systems, and retention clearly. The key is that risk-based does not mean vague. It means deliberate about where detail yields the most operational value. Over time, as the program matures, you can expand coverage and deepen detail as needed. This approach keeps the program usable while still building defensible accountability where it matters most. Recording also needs a workflow, not just a template, because entries will only stay accurate if there is an operating process that updates them when reality changes. New features add new data elements. New vendors create new systems and transfers, and new analytics initiatives create new derived datasets. If those changes are not linked to inventory updates, your records drift and lose credibility. A good workflow ties recording updates to change triggers, such as product release processes, procurement approvals, system integration changes, and major process changes in functions like HR or customer support. It also assigns ownership so someone is accountable for keeping the record current, with periodic review to confirm accuracy. Privacy may coordinate and enforce standards, but system and process owners provide the facts because they are closest to what is actually happening. When recording is integrated into change management, accountability becomes continuous rather than episodic. These records are also essential for responding to real-world questions in a way that builds trust, because people will test your transparency with specific concerns. When a person asks why you need their date of birth, you should be able to explain the purpose in plain language, like verifying eligibility or preventing fraud, and also explain whether it is required or optional. When a person asks who can see their data, you should be able to explain access in role-based terms, like only support staff handling your ticket or only payroll staff handling compensation records. When a person asks how long you keep their records, you should be able to give a meaningful answer tied to the retention rule and the trigger event. When a regulator or auditor asks for proof, you should be able to show that the organization has a record of these decisions and that the record aligns with system behavior. This is what accountability looks like: consistent answers backed by recorded governance, not one-off improvisation. Recording data elements with context also strengthens internal decision-making because it provides a shared language for evaluating new proposals and resolving conflicts. If a product team wants to add a new field, the recorded purpose and retention expectations can guide whether the field is justified and how long it should be kept. If a marketing team wants access to support data, recorded access constraints and purpose limitation can explain why that sharing may be inappropriate without additional transparency and review. If a security team wants longer log retention, recorded retention rationale can support a balanced discussion of investigative value versus privacy risk. The record does not make decisions automatically, but it anchors decisions in documented facts and established principles. This reduces the chance that decisions are made by habit or convenience, and it reduces the chance that different teams make conflicting choices. When records are used this way, accountability becomes a living part of governance rather than a static artifact. As you close out this episode, the central lesson is that accountability is achieved when the organization can describe its data practices precisely and consistently, and then prove those practices through records and evidence. Recording data elements with purpose prevents casual reuse and supports transparency that matches reality. Recording access makes internal sharing governable, supports least privilege, and helps investigate incidents responsibly. Recording systems reveals where data actually resides, including copies and derived datasets, which is essential for rights fulfillment and disposal. Recording retention connects legal duties, business needs, and risk reduction into executable rules that can be defended and audited. When these attributes are captured and standardized, risk-based records, and maintained through change workflows, privacy becomes operationally reliable. That reliability is what turns a privacy program from a set of intentions into a system of accountability that leaders can govern and individuals can trust.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.